Beauty is the official soulmate of art, but humanity, being humanity, has always kept a side chick, a secret obsession with the ugly, the grotesque, the deformed, the things that slithered out of our minds before psychology existed. Look at any era, and you will find not just beauty, but also the ugly, crafted, curated, and worshipped in ways we pretend not to understand. Gothic cathedrals decorated like monster zoos, medieval manuscripts hijacked by deranged snails and killer rabbits, Goya dragging Spain into its own nightmares, Picasso dismantling the human face like faulty IKEA furniture. Cultures didn't stumble into ugliness, they befriended it, because ugliness is the pressure valve of any civilization. It protects, exposes, accuses, purges, mocks, warns, and sometimes, especially when beauty fails, it exposes the truth. So, in this episode, we walk into the darkness, into the unknown, forgotten, into the beautifully wrong. And my name is Nina. I'm not only a host of this channel, but also an art historian and an active artist. If you're interested in learning more about my artwork, make sure to check the links below. And this is the secret history of why ugly matters. Welcome to the medieval Europe, where architecture doubled as psychological warfare. Gothic cathedrals weren't serene sanctuaries. They were stone fortresses plastered with nightmares. Gargoyles, grotesques, chimeras, creatures with crocodile bodies, bat wings, bird heads, lizard eyes, nature's questionable arts and crafts project. The church's official reason was naturally moralistic. Monsters remind the faithful of sin's consequences. Camus writes that grotesque acted as spiritual signpost of moral danger. But the unofficial explanation, much simpler and frankly way more human. Ugliness protects. Medieval superstition ran on this logic. If a building looks terrifying, evil won't dare enter. So churches became spiritual fortresses, armed with visual malware. Your antivirus system, but with claws. The Luttrell Psalter, circa 1320-40, is a masterpiece of violence, nonsense, and deranged humor. Knights dueling snails, demons smacking people with fish, a rabbit about to execute a man, creatures straight out of a fever dream, sketched by someone who ran out of ink and sanity at the same time. These weren't mistakes or lack of skills. They were the medieval worldview illustrated. The sacred is in the center, the grotesque at the edges, because the word itself had edges you were supposed to fear. Cohen calls the medieval logic border thinking, where monsters represent the unstable edges of society. Ugliness wasn't an aesthetic, it was a worldview. And here is the twist. Medieval studies never prepared you. Medieval people were quite hilarious. While the church preached solemnity, manuscripts were being vandalized by scribes with the chaotic energy of a 14-year-old TikToker. Beautiful biblical scenes, and in the corner, a man mooning a saint, a nun breastfeeding a monkey, cats playing fiddles, a man fighting geese. James Clark notes that medieval margins were visual playgrounds for social anxiety and private jokes. This wasn't disrespect, it was survival. In a world full of plagues, wars, and divine punishment, the grotesque functioned as a pressure valve again. A reminder that humor and horror were neighbors. The medieval mind didn't fear the ugly, it domesticated it. Then came Renaissance, the great beauty revival, beautiful hot bodies, stunning faces and hair. Proportion, harmony, symmetry. Humanity decides collectively, let's be hot again. But ugliness didn't pack its bags. It simply went undercover. Leonardo da Vinci's grotesque heads. Leonardo, the poster boy for ideal beauty, created dozens of drawings of grotesque, exaggerated faces, bulbous noses, dropping jaws, asymmetric skulls, expressions twisted almost cartoonishly. Kemp notes these drawings reveal Leonardo's obsession with studying human character through physical extremes. To Leonardo, beauty was a performance, ugliness was a way of confessing the truth. He saw what psychologists would articulate centuries later. The grotesque reveals personality more honestly than beauty ever could.
I hate to be that person to disturb you from watching the video, but while we're on the topic of ugliness and the painting of the Ugly Duchess, let me introduce you to my art meme collection that I created a couple of years ago and it's still available for purchase. If you are somehow quirky or just a mean friend, check this series out because I'm sure it's gonna make you laugh. The details will be in the description box below. I'll see you there.
Exaggeration becomes a tool, not to mock the poor, but to expose the powerful. Ugliness slides from spiritual territory into political one. By the 17th and 18th century, Europe truly overdosed on beauty. Baroque drama, Rococo sweetness, cherubs everywhere, pasta overload. If beauty was sugar, this era was diabetic. And whenever beauty becomes too perfect, ugliness becomes psychologically necessary. Giovanni Battista Piazzetta painted bakers and commoners with raw honesty, wrinkles, poverty, dirt cutting through Rococo sweetness with uncomfortable realism. William Hogarth weaponized ugliness as a social critique. His engravings are chaotic, grotesque, often downright disgusting, but they expose corruption more effectively than any sermon. Bindman writes that Hogarth's ugly truth-telling created an entire visual language of moral satire. Ugliness became a civic duty. Then comes Francisco Goya, humanity's chosen ambassador of nightmares. Witches, goblins, corrupt aristocrats with animal heads. This wasn't fiction, it was social X-ray. Paintings like Saturn devouring his sun, they weren't meant for a public eye. Goya painted them directly on his walls as a way of a private exorcism. No symbols, no allegories, just human brutality stripped bare. Goya understood something revolutionary. Beauty comforts, ugliness confronts. Licht calls Goya the first modern visual psychologist. He didn't paint monsters, he painted humanity without its illusion. By the 19th century, ugliness truly takes its place on the throne. This Scream 1893 by Edvard Munch turns internal anxiety into visual distortion. The ugly isn't physical, it's emotional architecture. Schiele painted bodies like they were made of tension and guilt, hands too large, limbs too sharp, faces too hollow. Otto Dix painted disfigured soldiers, amputees, scarred faces. His war triptychs show ugliness as moral testimony. Whitford calls expressionism the aesthetic of the raw nerve. Modernity isn't afraid of ugliness, it truly needs it. Picasso didn't distort faces because he couldn't draw. In fact, he was a very technically skilled painter. He distorted them because beauty was a lie he wanted to break open. Influenced by African masks, Iberian sculpture, El Greco's elongations, children's art, Picasso industrialized wrongness. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon 1907 is a visual slap. 5 women staring you down as if saying, "Stop pretending we are pretty for you." Berger writes that Picasso used ugliness as a weapon against conventional vision. The grotesque becomes a truth delivery system. Dali, Ernst, Breton, the unconscious is bizarre, erotic, violent, and definitely not pretty. Dada, ugly as rebellion, beauty was propaganda. Ugliness was the only honest response to a world that survived the First World War. Francis Bacon distorted reality. Bacon wanted to distort the thing into reality. His ugliness wasn't a metaphor, it was existential X-ray. The 20th century does not merely inherit ugliness, it institutionalizes it. By the time the 20th century begins, beauty is no longer innocent. After industrial slaughter, mechanized war, and bureaucracy death, beauty starts to feel obscene. Harmony feels dishonest, proportion feels complicit. And prettiness feels like a lie. Someone is telling you to keep you quiet. This is the century where ugliness stops being decorative or marginal and becomes philosophical. Not because artists suddenly wanted to shock, but because the word itself had become unrecognizable. Trauma replaces theology. After World War I, artists like Otto Dix and George Gross paint bodies that look broken because bodies were broken. Faces collapse, limbs are prosthetic, skin looks diseased. This is not ugliness for effect. It's a way of reporting the truth. Neue Sachlichkeit. They don't ask what is beautiful anymore. They ask what is true. And truth, after trenches and gas, is jug. Totalitarian regime understood something crucial. Ugliness is dangerous, but only when they don't control it. Nazi Germany labeled modern art degenerate because distortion threatens order. Soviet Russia, meanwhile, demands social realism, smiling workers, heroic farmers, clean futures. But beneath the polished surface, another art grows. Unofficial Soviet artists like Ilya Kabakov, Oscar Rabin, Vladimir Nemukhin produce cramped, ugly, psychologically suffering works. not grotesque in form, but in atmosphere. Their ugliness is bureaucratic, claustrophobic. Then there is Zdzisław Beksiński, Polish post-war, private, and utterly uncompromising. Beksiński's words are skeletal architecture, flayed bodies, landscapes that look like memory itself has rotten, yet his paintings are meticulous, almost tender in their execution. This is crucial. He does not paint the chaos, he paints the aftermath. There are no battles in Beksiński's work, only what remains after meaning collapses. Unlike political art, Beksiński refuses explanation. He famously avoided titles. He rejected symbolism, and yet the image linger because they feel inevitable. This is ugliness stripped of ideology, existential ugliness. Not the system is bad, but this is what existence feels like when God does not answer. In Japan, ugliness takes a different form. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, abstraction is not enough. The body itself becomes the site of rupture. The Gutai group tears canvases, throws paint with violence, performs the construction as creation. Later, Butoh dance emerges, slow, controlled, ghost-like. Butoh is not meant to be watched comfortably, it is meant to haunt. Here, ugliness is not grotesque, it's uncanny. Flesh becomes unfamiliar, movement feels wrong. Artists like Yayoi Kusami, often remembered for her polka dots, also belong here. Her early performances and installations deal with obliteration. This is not Western shock. This is a post-nuclear trauma. Meanwhile, in the West, ugliness becomes strategic. Abstract expressionism, Pollock, Rothko, de Kooning, is promoted internationally as proof of freedom. The irony is brutal. Art that looks chaotic, ugly, unstructured is used to symbolize liberty, while elsewhere realism is enforced. Ugliness becomes ideological camouflage. And the audience learns a new lesson. If you don't understand it, it's probably important. By the late 20th century, ugliness no longer needs monsters. It steeps into minimalism, into silence, into emptiness. Artists remove content entirely because absence itself becomes the wound. The ugly is no longer loud, it is sterile, industrial, institutional. And perhaps the most unsettling part of it is that it's become normalized. So, what has changed over the centuries? Earlier centuries used ugliness to teach morals, to frighten sinners, to warn believers. The 20th century art does something else. It uses ugliness to say there's nothing else to learn. There's no lesson, no meaning, no redemption arc, no tidy ending, only survival, memory, and repetition. This is not about art that wants to be loved, but art that wants to be endured. Thank you for watching. I hope I will see you in the next episode because this series has just started and there's so much more up in my sleeve. I'll see you in one of my next videos. Ciao!